All right, welcome to the SwineTime podcast here at Pipestone. I'm your host, Spencer Wayne. I am one of the practicing vets here at Pipestone, also one of the owners in Pipestone Holdings, and I have two of my partners here as guests today, and they're going to talk about what I think is pretty interesting general topics and conversation. Normally I'm the guy that I just go to the barns. You know, I'm very limited in my exposure, but my guests today are those that get to see higher level things. So they'll have a 10,000 foot view of the industry regarding health and trade. And despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in the cage. So I'll just be like a kind of an ignorant component to this, asking questions to people that see a lot of stuff. That's where I'll come at it from. So Joel and Terry are my guests. Joel Nerem, Terry Wolters. Joel, why don't you start, introduce yourself briefly, and then follow that by Terry, and then we'll get right into some just general good conversation about the world of pigs.
Sure. No, thanks, Spencer, for the invitation to be here today. My name's Joel Nerem. I'm a practicing veterinarian here at Pipestone. I've been here about 18 years. I do swine practice. I've served a number of roles in our company, but just happy to be here to talk about some things internationally focused.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there and say, you kind of undersold what you do. You're the guy in our group that ends up going to meetings all over the world regarding health. You're the chief veterinary officer for us, so you are the face of Pipestone Health. You get to see stuff that the rest of us don't get to see as much of, correct?
Yeah, I've had some unique opportunities. I do spend a reasonable amount of time in Mexico and some of our other Latin American countries that we do some consulting in, and so I've had that great opportunity. I recently got back from the International Pig Veterinary Society meeting in Germany, which it's interesting just to get some of the international perspective on the swine industry, swine health, that sort of thing. And so that was a valuable experience as well. And then I get a chance to engage with, others that are sort of working on health, whether it's the National Pork Board or National Pork Producers Council, the U.S. SHIP Project. I'm on the traceability working group there, and so get a chance to engage in some things that way too.
Okay. And that's why you're here today, because you see those things and you're engaged in those things. Terry.
Yeah.
Who are you? Who is Terry Wolters?
Good question. If you figure that out, let me know, Spencer. Been here, Pipestone, 27 years, coming up on 28 years. It's been a great run with the company. Have the ability, to watch it grow and develop. Have met a lot of great people and producers, shareholders throughout those years. But I think part of the reason you've got me here today is because of my, history with NPPC and being on the board of directors there for 10 years. And that involvement and exposure to a lot of things on the national front relative to trade and those kinds of topics is probably what's got me in the seat today. So thank you.
No, glad you're here. What's your current role or involvement with NPPC? Right
so now? I'm officially off the board, would be in a past president's role, which really just involved in the trade committee and I'm actually still on the animal health food safety committee, which really has been related to the traceability work that we did while I was in an officer position there.
Okay. And that's why you're here, because you see all that stuff that we don't see. There's a lot of good topics we could hit. I don't know where you want to start, but because I'm most familiar with health, I'll turn it over to Joel, and I'll just start out with what's the front burner issues. Everybody's kind of been exposed to and thinking about African Swine Fever for the last several years now, especially being in the Dominican Republic. So Joel, if you're ranking stuff that people are worried about recently, locally, U.S. in a broader sense and then around the world, African Swine Fever, High Path Avian Influenza, what are you seeing or hearing now recently in the meetings that you're aware of that we should all be aware of?
Yeah, I think it's the two things you just mentioned, actually. ASF continues to be the hot topic worldwide. When you look at today versus 5 years ago, ASF is in more countries than it was 5 years ago. It's definitely here in the Western Hemisphere, as you mentioned. It is on the island of Hispaniola. The Dominican Republic and Haiti are both positive, and it really doesn't look like it's going to leave there anytime soon. I mean, I think we're in it for the long haul.
Okay.
I don't see a pathway to eradication in that country. I think most folks know that, right? But certainly in Europe, they continue to diagnose more cases. Germany just recently diagnosed more cases, and actually a case in the western part of the country. And so, that's not good news for them. And so I think ASF continues to be the hot button topic. It's something we can't let our guard down on. And it's an area where, lots of folks continue to work very hard at trying to find a vaccine solution.
Why is it not possible to eradicate now?
Well, I think we were willing to take some measures we're not really willing to take today.
Like kill all the pigs on the island?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then just the situation in Haiti right now with respect to its government, conditions in Haiti are very different than they were 10 years ago. And I mean, Haiti doesn't even really have a functional government and functional public service right now, let alone let's try and do a national disease eradication program.
Yeah.
That's the furthest thing from their minds.
We obviously have influence there. We have people that interact with them. You've interacted with that group, or with the effort at least. We have limited functionability there, or limited influence, or how much would you say our influence is on that island to do things?
Well, I think there's probably almost none in Haiti.
Okay.
We made an effort in the Dominican Republic here a few years ago, and I think just from what I've heard, it might have been a kind of a frustrating situation. I don't know that there's the will or the commitment amongst the Dominican government at this time to do an eradication, and so there's really, USDA's hands are kind of tied, right? We were down there trying to help them, and I think right now, I think everyone is sort of resigned to the fact it's going to be endemic for a while there.
Okay. High Path Avian Influenza. What do you know about that currently?
Well, that's certainly the hot topic, especially I think as it relates now to how that virus has jumped species. And, everyone I think is probably familiar with the cases that they're finding in dairy cattle. That's, I think a surprise and a concern. The fact now that it's also been found in a few workers on dairies. And so luckily they've not suffered extremely severe health effects, but the pictures of the conjunctivitis that one gentleman had certainly didn't look anything less than painful. So,
no.
So certainly that's a concern right now, and I think USDA and others are trying to figure out how to deal with that. But High Path is certainly a concern, and as it relates to our swine customers, we continue to tell them be extremely vigilant with biosecurity, because the one thing we don't want is for someone to diagnose that in a pig.
Yeah. Well, assuming that pigs can get infected and sometimes might, if you say, well, like it's flu, they might very well get it. At least it doesn't appear to be something that gets into the meat. It'd be one thing that people might want to know. It's like, all right, flu for pigs doesn't show up in the meat. This is maybe unique and different with the dairy cattle and the milk.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, influenza is not transmitted in meat that we know of. The meat is safe. That's been the talking point for a long time, right, with respect to, the safety of pork and that sort of thing. And I would also highlight, too, that, pasteurization of milk seems to kill the virus as well. And so I'm not trying to incite a panic in the public with respect to milk consumption. I think there's good evidence that pasteurization has been effective at killing the virus in milk. And so milk is safe.
Okay.
Don't drink unpasteurized milk, though.
Okay. Good transition to Terry, who's looking at me with his eyebrow, like, kind of weird, dude. So we brought up two diseases that potentially could be trade barriers. Is there any health interactions between countries right now, like with regards to that are somewhat front burner issues that, like, if we got this, we wouldn't be able to sell pork. It is a concern, or anything health related that affects trade? Well,
absolutely. The, concern with African swine fever, right? It will be an immediate closure of trade. And many of our trading partners around the globe are just looking for a reason not to buy pork from us, right? We pressure their market. We're low-cost producers around the world, and so that definitely is a concern. And with trade being 25% of our total production, it's vitally important to the industry that we maintain those trade channels. And obviously the avian influenza issues that we've had years ago with the broiler and the poultry exports impacted that industry as well. So traceability and regionalization and the ability to restore trade in the event that we would have an unfortunate outbreak of flu or African swine fever is vitally important to the industry, because those countries that we export to, they primarily consume products that we don't use very much in this country. Offal products, hams. Largest consumer of hams is Mexico. And if we would lose that market, our overall domestic consumption will not support what we've lost.
So what is traceability? Because I hear it's talked about a lot, but what actually does that mean when you say traceability?
So really what we're trying to do is prove to our trading partners that we know where pigs are moved from and to, and we can identify that trade or movement process. So in the event that there would be an outbreak of a foreign animal disease, we can track and prove to those trading partners that certain regions or areas of the country would not be affected, and we could hopefully restore shipments out of that area
so you'd have
sooner.
Compartmentalization, I hear that word a lot. So when you're saying traceability, it's essentially saying, hey, whatever country we'd like to sell pork to, you're only going to get pork out of this plant who only took pigs from this area, nothing to do with this other part of the country that has the problem.
That's the concept. And obviously Joel spent a lot of time in that arena and may know if I've left any holes in what you're trying to capture there.
I would just add that the first and most primary use of traceability would be in response to the outbreak, not just proving to our trading partners eventually that certain areas are free, but it's simply a response to let's find this virus and stamp it out before it becomes endemic in our country, which is something that Haiti and the DR weren't able to do, right? But that's to me, from a producer perspective, and how do we protect our industry, the ability to respond to an outbreak with a highly effective and real-time traceability system is going to be key.
So what is our movement towards that? If there's some endpoint of, yes, we have a product now or a system that other countries would respect and accept, are we 10% the way down the road, stalled out at 5%, halfway there? How would you frame that up as far as something that people, that you get, the level of exposure you guys get, how close are we?
Well, to all the way back, Spencer, I mean, it's been a long runway. It's 29 years that we've been working on a traceability program. However, that traceability concern was largely related to foot and mouth disease. As African swine fever ended up on the doorstep in the last few years, it has extremely heightened the urgency to get this implemented, right? And then the high path experiences that we've had has also brought it to the forefront. So over the last 18 months, the pork industry has convened a committee that's identified key producers across the industry, the market channels, packers, the state veterinarians, and those groups have come together. People have come together. We've built a guideline that was then submitted to the delegate body at the National Pork Forum in March. That was approved by the delegate body and has now been submitted to APHIS. And so APHIS is reviewing that. They're in the process of what they potentially would consider as drafting a rule that then would be presented for public comment. And then ultimately, if we can bring a formable traceability program to the industry that we can support and get behind collectively as an industry. So that process may be 1 to 2 years down the track yet.
Okay. But basically you're saying right now it's getting ready to send something to APHIS, which
has been done.
And they'll look at it and say, oh, we're going to make a rule, which let's make some regulations that actually are teeth at that point. Is that a teeth point?
Yep.
And then they turn around, commentary, feedback period, and then they push that onto packers or producers or both. They have a jurisdiction. It would
be an industry, depending upon how the rule is defined, and the points within that guideline, yes, would be turned into a mandatory program.
And do you think that the product or the system comes after APHIS says, now I'm going to start biting because I got some implementation teeth? When do we actually get this? When I'm talking about the product or the system of, here's our way to do it, because that's not been created yet. That'll come after APHIS says you got to make this thing happen, or does that happen now?
it's in some of the guidelines. The guidelines have been established, and I can't quote all the points in the guidelines, but it's been well socialized both at the national meetings, the state meetings, social media, et cetera, to try and make producer awareness first and foremost. But also we've gathered input from all the market segments, the producer segments, and the state animal health officials to try and craft a program that we can all get behind and work with.
Yeah. I know there's been some early efforts towards these type of things of documenting where pigs come from, some of the traceability stuff, how you put your movements in, but it seems pretty rough. I don't know, and not functional yet. Is that fair, Joel?
Yeah, there's tools out there, and I think we've got AgView, we've got RabApp. There's various products that are available today. I mean, so if a producer wants to track all their movements and put them in a platform that's readily available to state animal health officials, that does exist, and I would say that today the framework for that through the U.S. Swine Health Improvement Plan is probably the best one that we have.
Okay.
We've at Pipestone have been very much encouraging our customers to become involved in U.S. SHIP. All the Pipestone managed farms are participating in the U.S. SHIP program, which requires us to register all our sites, and then we've been collecting all of our animal movement data on one of those platforms in order to have that available. And so I would say from a preparedness perspective, voluntarily, it's there.
Okay.
There are tools available. Now, could they be better? Sure. There's always room to improve, and there's some things we'd like to see happen. But
okay, so that's really kind of developed, functional at least, but that's at the producer level, or is it also at the plant level? Because at some point the plant's got to say, oh, I got this meat and I know it came from safe places, and so that information's got to. Is that built yet? That the plant is involved?
Yeah, they're working on that, and there's been some pilot projects done through the U.S. SHIP program. Now we're just completing the second pilot project that has involved packers recording the data that they're getting. And so what we're finding in these pilots is that there's tools available, but there's a lot of work to be done to get us where we need to be.
Okay, maybe we're further along than I thought. I was thinking that. I don't know why I was thinking we weren't any further, but yeah, you just mentioned some things that have been worked on for a while, and if they work, it's just a matter of implementing them consistently then and enforcing it.
Well, and I think the other key point of that is it's part of the preparedness process, right? We can't wait until an outbreak happens to develop this. We'll be way behind. So we're trying to be proactive and develop a protocol and a program that we can all get behind as an industry. What we don't really want is if we just sit on our hands and let the government issue, this is what you'll do. And it won't even be practical within our industry.
What could go wrong if that happened?
Well, I'm sure nothing, Spencer. I'm sure it'll all be handled.
But
in November, it'll all be handled.
It'll all be handled. Whatever all the solutions and all the problems are going to happen in November.
Mm-hmm.
But to that point, the reason we'd want to do it ahead of that is because people that are listening, us, this group, we're touching the pigs, and the practical rubber and road meeting each other are happening here, and government oftentimes is pretty ham-handed with what it would do. If I'm saying, I don't know if that's an
well, and I think a big part of and no disrespect to the government, but oftentimes they don't completely understand our industry, right? Yeah. And so then they would impose some rules that we couldn't even live up to. And so we're trying to be proactive and draft something that we can actually function with. Yeah.
Just a question. This effort we just described here, and we're aspiring to do these things, who is really, around the world, who's really good at this kind of stuff and who's not good at all?
Again, through the U.S. SHIP Traceability Working Group, there were some case studies or case examples that were looked at as we thought about how would we do a system in the United States. And so I know they looked at Canada. Canada has a mandatory traceability system there. Every pig producer is required to report all their movements within a certain time frame. Brazil has a program as well, and then there's a number of European countries that have that also that were looked at. So there are some examples out there of where it's already being done. I'll put a plug in that I think none of those systems are real time. You have like 7 days to get the data in. You've got and so there's going to be a lag, right? I think in any kind of response situation, you want that data. If it happened yesterday, it needs to already be in there.
Yeah. Are we aspiring to a real-time system?
Well, not yet, but that's what I believe, many of us believe we need to move to. And honestly, when you look, the technology is there, right? right? I have an app on my phone called Uber that allows me to coordinate transportation for myself or for my family, and it's real time. It records at real time. It's all in real time. Why can't we do that for pig movements?
Yeah.
Right? Shouldn't be that hard. Anyway, there's a lot of smart people out
technology
there.
will follow.
Yeah.
Right. It'll develop behind it because, to Joel's point, it's there.
Yeah,
in other
that's a good
industries.
example. Like you have to want it bad enough to just do it because it's right there to get. Anyway,
And I think the main thing where producers get concerned is that I have to sit down at a computer and type in all the information. That's where data fatigue sets in. But to Joel's point, right, if it's app pingable, it'll happen.
And we have apps in the industry now, right, that allow us to monitor the function of staff on a pig farm, recording data in real time, recording how they're monitoring sows in the farrowing process, right? That's real time. We have apps that are used to help monitor grow finish, right? Where we're seeing daily mortalities and all those kinds of things come across. There's no reason we can't do the same thing for movement, and I think that's what we all need to aspire to.
Yeah, I think the technology's there. There's so many examples without going into them here.
Well, and the other piece of it that we're highly endorsing is the RFID tags, so that they're scannable. You can read them. They can go through panel readers, and you have that technology available today.
Yeah.
And so then you walk them by. You don't have to write it and record it, and then it's accurate. Because that's the other piece that's important. It has to be accurate.
Mm-hmm. That's been a concept for 20 plus years. It works a little better for cattle than it does for thousands and thousands of pigs running through a chute. But the technology's there. It's just a matter of do we want to use it or not. So stepping outside of like real concerns, and this is also a real concern, but Terry, have you got any comments on politics of our government related in relation to other countries with trade agreements? You had some good comments before we started recording where I know you think about it a lot. It's there. But what are the things that a producer would probably want to be aware of regarding like, how does our government interact with other countries that affects trade of pork?
Well, without question, our largest trading volume is done with free trade agreements. But unfortunately, in the last two administrations, we haven't had any new free trade agreements done, and frankly, they just avoided that process. And so our trade situation in the pork industry, really, we run into headwinds in other countries because of other commodities. And the one that comes to mind is the Chinese headwinds there. We have a 25% tariff on pork going into China, but it was really over steel.
Coming from them to us. There was a retaliation thing.
Right. It was Chinese steel coming into the U.S. market, so they blocked it on our side. Well, then China retaliates and says, well, we're going to block your pork coming in. And so we get caught in the multitude of commodities, if you will, that pork is a factor.
That's replicated over and over again with individual countries. It's another country that wants to export something, and it's just always the back and forth and give and take of one commodity that you want. And then do they block it completely, or is it just tariffed into a?
It can be both. It can be both. Yeah.
So either penalize it or block it, but that happens all the time. Is that fair?
It does. Yep.
Okay.
And countries trade what countries have to trade.
Yeah.
Right.
And so China was steel at that time, and that put the tariff imposition on our pork going out there. So and that's a one-to-one country agreement. You talked about trade agreements versus a bilateral agreement between one country and another.
Yep.
And that was a China.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership is probably what you're alluding to, and that involved like 13 different countries collectively, right? But during the Trump administration, they didn't want to do it as a joint. They want to do bilateral agreements with those individual countries more on a one-to-one basis, and that just hasn't gotten accomplished.
Happened. How does that happen? Is that at the level of the president or his direct administration doing that, or is that a subordinated part of the government? Who actually negotiates a trade agreement? How does that happen?
Well, there's trade permission authority that Congress grants the president, and that's for a period of time, and then once that expires, it has to be reapproved. And we're in a phase right now that we've expired it. It's in an expired form, and so our president currently doesn't have that authority.
So basically, it's total stall out. That can't happen until Congress decides to reapprove it. Is that where it would come from? Okay,
correct.
And that gives the current administration the ability to say, hey, let's negotiate some deal.
Yeah.
Whether it's a broader trade agreement or a bilateral trade agreement. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Anything else that a producer would want to know about that sausage making process?
Well, just it's very complicated, and that's we get very focused on what's important to us as a pork industry or agriculture, but we're often the victim of many of those trade headwinds.
Yeah. Great product priced into another country. And because some disagreement over a product that country wants to sell back might stall out our ability to sell pork.
That's right. And I think the other part that dovetails into that, Spencer, is the fact that, EU has passed this Green Deal program over there. And so they are essentially regulating their livestock industry down to a sustainable consumption basis, right? They want to be they want to just produce enough pork for their people and what they need. They don't want to produce extra, and they just continue to pass more regulations on producers in agriculture that makes it a bigger and bigger challenge. So EU is the largest exporting country in the world. Mm-hmm. And so we recently took a trip to Brazil just to kind of understand the Brazilian industry, because as U.S. pork producers, we see that as an opportunity for growth in the export market around the globe. As their volume decreases, somebody needs to backfill that.
And it wouldn't be us selling to Europe necessarily. It'd be wherever Europe was selling, that whole opens up.
Exactly. And so when you look at the other pork producing countries around the globe, Brazil comes to mind as a strong competitor to the U.S. industry, right? They have low labor costs. They have low grain costs. You want to talk about a real advantage? They have no PRRS in that country, right? Okay. So just glue those three things together and apply it to our industry. They're a real challenge to us as a in the global market.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's probably a ton more to talk about that, but that's insightful.
Yep.
I just thought of one thing, Joel, that before we get off this, disease elimination at a national level. Are we ready to try to eradicate any diseases we currently have?
That's a great question.
There's a whole list.
Well, it depends on who you talk to, right? I think people's viewpoints across the country would vary. Our position at Pipestone is yes, and I think there's others that would share that. I know that last fall, a year ago, there were discussions with some folks regarding PED. Mm-hmm. Is it time for a national PED elimination? I would be very supportive of that. I think the tools are there. We've been able to demonstrate that we can eliminate PED from breeding herds and we can keep it out. The tools are there for that, right?
Yeah.
And I know Bill Hollis, as incoming president of AASV, they initiated a working group within AASV that's actually working to talk about that right now. And so I'm encouraged by that. I know there was some discussion about that at the last AASV meeting in March, and I think they'll be looking to look at synergies with the U.S. SHIP program, perhaps creating a PED-free certification through the U.S. SHIP program. And so that's probably one. I think mycoplasma hive pneumonia would be another one where we've got the tools to eliminate. And I really think, just philosophically, we as an industry and we as veterinarians in the United States need to start thinking about getting rid of diseases instead of adding them to the list, because lately all we've done is add new diseases to our list.
Yeah.
I think the time is to start getting rid of some of the ones where it's feasible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of myco, but yeah, both of those for different. They have different characteristics. Myco would just be a slow mover, and all the coronaviruses are so acute, but the immunity is so great. They're different than PRRS, and so those are two. I'd say they're the low-hanging fruit.
I wouldn't start with PRRS.
No.
We know we can eliminate it from the sow farm and that sort of thing, but as a region or nation, I don't know that that's the right thing to do. But I think these other two, and there's probably other examples, but from from an economic impact, PED and mycoplasma, I think should be targets.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, we've chewed up a lot of time. So I want to say thanks to our listeners for tuning in, and thanks to our guests, Terry and Joel. I appreciate you guys coming on. I think if you guys came on at a later date for similar discussion at some regularity, I think this is, for me, it's the most interesting type of podcast to listen to, because you guys see very high level stuff and have good commentary. So thank you for both joining us. Thanks to our listeners, and join us again the next time for our next episode of the SwineTime podcast here at Pipestone. The SwineTime podcast was created for the pork industry and individual pork producers around the country. Hosted by me, Dr. Spencer Wayne with Pipestone Veterinary Services, the podcast contains pork industry news, advancements in animal care, and how to enhance your productivity. Find the SwineTime podcast at www.pipestone.com or on your favorite listening platform.